And let's continue with the 6th chapter of The Cockatrice Boys by Joan Aiken. When Sana woke for the second time, it was a truly ferocious degree of cold. She had thought she was cold in the carriage, but that was balmy warmth compared with what she now felt. A wild gale was blowing, and the icy bite of snowflakes on her face might have been what woke her. She struggled to a sitting position and found with relief that at least she had the use of her feet and could by degrees clamber up, stand, walk, and warm herself. It was night, but not completely dark. There must be a full moon somewhere behind the snow clouds. She was at the side of a track, a flat, bare place enclosed by woods. Behind her rose a sloping cliff, and on the other side of the track there seemed to be a deep drop into a gully. Behind the wail of wind, she could hear water falling. To her right, she saw that the track was blocked. A huge tree had fallen across it in a tangled confusion of smashed branches. Perhaps the sound of the tree's fall was what had woken her. It must have happened very recently. Some of the branches were still groaning and settling. If it had been 20 yards farther that way, I should have been killed. I should have been crushed to death before I woke, thought Sana, and a strange chill came into her, a chill of mind, not of body, at the thought of the danger that had been so close. She dragged again at the cords round her wrists, and at last they were loosened enough so that she could twist out first one hand, then the other. She was on the point of throwing away the tangled mess of rope, but then thought better and stuffed it into her pocket. No telling what might come in handy among these groaning, threshing trees. And in the same thrifty spirit, she picked up the length of coarse cloth which had been wrapped around her head. It might once have been the skirts of a man's coat. It still carried that strange, unpleasant Swedish smell, but was at least some protection against the weather. She drew it over her shoulders. Which way had the carriage brought her? It had turned left, she remembered, from the wider road, and then left again into the quarry. Logically, therefore, to go back the way she had come, she ought to go to her right. But that was impossible, for the way was completely blocked by the fallen tree. Doggedly, she turned in the other direction and followed the track uphill. I wonder why there are no monsters. Perhaps they don't come out when it snows so hard. She was too hungry and weak to walk at all fast, but the act of walking warmed her, and she tried once again to remember what had happened when the cockatrice bell came to a stop. The men went ahead to lay a new track. We had stopped on a tiny deserted station. Mrs. Churt made blackberry tea for the fellows working up the track. Aiken and I carried the trays and mugs. Somebody must have nobbled me, she realized. When I was taking the tray of empty mugs back to the train, that's as far as I can go. I can't remember any more after that. But why did they do it? What's the point? And if there is a point, why leave me here in the middle of no man's land? What's the point of that? The sound of those two voices hung in her mind's ear. The pleading, beseeching gabble, the cold, distant refusal. Who were they? Who were they? Why did they go off and leave me in the middle of heaven knows where? Did they mean me to die, or just to be lost? If they meant me to die, she concluded, they'd have slit my throat and done with it. There was no shilly-shallying with that pair. They'd have done it as soon as kiss your hand, so I reckon they just wanted me away from the train, and now I'm away. They don't care a button what happens to me. But where was Cold Voice going? And why didn't he want the other one along with him? Suddenly she remembered an odd little passage of dialogue heard in Colonel Clipspeak's office when they were trying to make contact with Leicester Square headquarters by means of the electric kettle in the Colonel's dress saber. Unloosen the tempest. Master, it shall be done. I do believe that was the self-same voice, Sana thought. It had the same icy cold twang, brings you out in goose pimples just to think of it, and the other one, the whiny one, asking and begging and asking. Why did that seem some way familiar too? Who does it sound like? Someone I haven't known very long? The mayor of Newcastle? No, it was Tom Flint, she thought suddenly. Of course it was Tom Flint. The discovery was not cheering. In fact, it was very lowering. Sana turned for relief to Dr. Wren's remedy for overcoming depression and boredom, the use of figures. The multiplication table has helped me out of many a tight corner, he told her, and out of some loose corners, too. Oh, Dr. Wren, thought Sana, how I wish you were here now. I don't know what kind of a corner I'm in, but it feels dead uncomfortable. 9 nines are 81, 9 tens are 90, 9 11s are 99, 9 12s are... Excuse me. The track narrowed here between steep mossy banks, and the surface underfoot became a gluey mixture of snow and deep mud. Sometimes she sank up to her knees. She lost a shoe and barely managed to rescue it by delving down in freezing mud with her hands, then lost the other one altogether. Only the knowledge that it would be wholly impossible to battle a way through that fallen tree kept her from turning back. But what if this path leads nowhere, comes to a stop, she thought. Then I'm really done. But the path has to lead somewhere, doesn't it? She struggled on. 8 8s are 64, 8 9s are 72. After a while, the path widened again, and the surface improved. Now it was firm rock or frozen earth under layers of fallen leaves and snow. Sana, wincing as she walked on bare and burning feet, remembered an old rhyme that her mother used to sing about souls after death, making their arduous way through purgatory and its trials. If hosen nor shoon thou ne'er gavest nain, the winds shall prick thee to the bare bane. That old ballad Mam used to sing. Mam was Scottish, of course. She knew all those old rhymes. How did the refrain go? This say the night, this say night, this say night, every night an alley, fire and sleet and candlelight, and heaven receive thy soul. I just wish I could see a bit of fire, a bit of candlelight. She came round a clump of trees and found herself in a clearing. An assart, she remembered Dr. Wren explaining the word one day when the Cockatrice Bell was running through woodland and came to an open space. It is a strip of land in the middle of woodland, my child, which has been opened out, the trees felled and uprooted so that the ground can be cultivated and crops grown, and mostly there will be a house, probably a dwelling of the first farmer who reclaimed the land. Often the house may be very old. Assarts are old, hundreds of years old, from when the whole country was covered by forests. These days, folks do not choose to live in woodland glades. There was a house in the clearing. Oh, Dr. Wren, I wish you were here. Dr. Wren had also told them stories in periods between instruction. People need stories, he said to Aiken and Sana, to remind them that reality is not only what we can see or smell or touch. Reality is in as many layers as the globe we live on itself, going inwards on a central core of red-hot mystery, and outwards to unguessable space. People's minds need detaching every now and then from the plain necessities of daily life. People need to be reminded of these other dimensions above us and below us. Stories do that. So he told his stories, which were always startling and often beautiful. The really strange thing about them was that, like dreams, they vanished. The very moment after the final sentence was spoken, the listeners would find that the whole web of the story had melted from memory, however hard they tried and struggled to hang on to even a single thread. They complained about this to Dr. Wren and asked why it should be so. We can remember other stories, like Alfred and the Cakes or Bluebeard. So why not yours? He laughed and said, Mine are intended to be lost, and none the worse for that. They are supposed to sink out of view deep down to where they will do the most good. If only I could remember just one of those stories now, thought Sana. Just the smallest scrap of one. But it was no use. She could not. Every attempt was some help, though. It seemed to brace her mind against the sight that she was expecting. 9 12s are 100 and... The house was very small, stone-built with a thatched roof. It stood on the opposite end of a clearing. If there had ever been any crop grown in this woodland place, its harvest had long ago been reaped. Snow lay level and untrodden over the sloping ground. Nobody had walked this way for many hours. But in one of the windows of the house, it had two, both at ground level, there was, unmistakably, a light. The dimmest, smokiest blink, yet a light. Sana limped on. What else could she do? There was no possibility of going back, and so far as she could make out, the track led no farther than this clearing. Behind the cottage the hill rose steeply, and if there had been a track she could not have followed it. She had come to the end of her strength. She felt unbelievably weary, hollow with hunger, sick with cold. Only this extremity of need drove her on. For as she neared the cottage, her unexpressed terror was confirmed. One, she now realized, that had been lurking at the back of her mind for the last few hours. A dark shape stood outside the door, a thing, an effigy of a person. Not a real person, but a grotesque figure made out of wicker or willow wands. Dozens of wands were loosely, lavishly coiled round to make a bulbous, huge head. Masses more sprang from the neck and ran down, bulging out into a grotesque body. Wands from the shoulders were buckled in at the wrists and spread out again as fingers curved into a clutching gesture. Sana stood still in the numbness of horror, for here was the cottage, here was the figure of her dream. Then a comforting thought came to her. Perhaps this is all a dream, the longest, worst dream I have ever dreamed, but still no more than that. I had better go into the house. Perhaps that will cause me to wake. Mustering up her courage, she walked up to the motionless figure, walked past it, and knocked on the door. Nobody answered, so she lifted the latch and went in. And that's the end of chapter 6.